Welcome to the third event in our Sustainable Entertainment Education series. Today, we'll be joined by climate actors Colby Minifie, Lee Rodriguez, and the legendary Danny Glover in a conversation led by activist and founder of the Climate Actors, Mr. Tim Guinee. I'm Jennifer Lynch. I oversee global corporate social responsibility for Paramount Pictures, but I'm here today on behalf of the Sustainable Production Alliance, a coalition of 10 of the most significant content creators in the world. Together with the Producers Guild of America, we're happy to host Leading with Empathy, Actors Talk Climate Change. You can find out more about our work together at greenproductionguide.com. Our co-hosts today are SAG-AFTRA and the Climate Actors. Which brings me back to our moderator, Tim Guinee. Tim's acting career spans more than 250 movies, miniseries, television series, and stage work. Tim also plays a leadership role in former Vice President Al Gore's Climate Reality Project. And last year, the former Vice President awarded Tim the Alfredo Circus Memorial Green Ring Award for his exceptional commitment as a climate communicator and activist. It is Tim's belief that the acting community is uniquely qualified to play a dynamic role in confronting the climate crisis that inspired this session today. And it's my honor now to hand this on over to Tim.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Guinee. I'm an actor. I'm also a leader with former Vice President Al Gore's Climate Reality Project. And as part of that work, one of the things that I've done is gone all over the United States and Canada and North Africa, and now with Zoom all over the world, giving presentations about the climate crisis. I have a thought, which is that if there's a failure of the environmental movement, it's that we tend to talk within the environmental bubble. We don't tend to talk to people who disagree with us. And I would say that's a societal-wide problem. So I give presentations to people on factory floors, to Houston oil industry executives, to maximum security inmates and coal miners, giving my very first talk to maximum security inmates. I went in and kind of door after door after door, locked behind me, and I gave a presentation. And I was talking about things like this, which are things that probably all of you know about, that solar radiation in the form of light waves passes through the Earth's atmosphere, and most of it gets absorbed, particularly by the dark parts of the Earth. And I can see they're getting bored. And you know, people in prison don't have a lot to do, so you have to work hard to bore people in prison. I didn't know what to do, so I told these big men a poem. And the poem I told them is a poem by Antonio Machado, a great Spanish poet. And it says, "The wind called on my soul one brilliant spring day with an odor of jasmine. And the wind said, in return for the odor of my jasmine, I'd like the odor of all of your roses. And I said, I have no roses. All of the flowers in my garden are dead. And the wind said, well, then I'll take the withered petals and the yellowed leaves. And the wind left, and I wept, and I said to myself, what have you done with the garden that was entrusted to you? And the minute I told that poem, which is completely counterintuitive, because you think, you know, if I want to look strong and tough, the last thing I want to do is be vulnerable and open myself up. And counterintuitively, of course, we always know that that's exactly what creates strength, is the ability to be vulnerable and show your emotions. And then I had those incarcerated friends along with me, and I could talk about this. And what I realized was that maybe there was something about actors, about the fact that we could open ourselves up and show who we were and not just talk in parts per million of CO2 and other things. Maybe there was something about the fact that one of the key tools in our toolbox is empathy. You know, we play all kinds of different people, and we have to learn to care about them and love them. And maybe we could do that and listen to audiences that were different than us and really carry the conversation forward. So I started this group called the Climate Actors, with that as a sort of core belief that actors have a very specific thing that we can do in this struggle. We have three absolutely extraordinary actors who are also wonderful, wonderful climate warriors with us. Danny Glover has been a commanding presence in motion pictures for the last 30 years. It's extraordinary the amount of work you've done. He's also done extraordinary work as an activist, particularly around civil rights, some of which may have come from his parents having that calling as well. He's also been helping on a terrible environmental justice situation I've been working on in Memphis, the Byhalia pipeline. And I couldn't be more thrilled to have him here. Also with us is Colby Minifie, who you know on The Boys and Fear the Walking Dead. She somehow is doing 2 TV shows at once, which is startling and fantastic. She's also in the recent movie Radium Girls, and she's also a trained climate reality leader and does work with the Climate Actors. And Lee Rodriguez, who's in Never Have I Ever, also just a week or 2 weeks ago, finished training with former Vice President Al Gore. And I'm really thrilled that you're all here with us today. So I want to start with one kind of basic question, which is, what was the thing that caught you, that got you involved in the climate struggle? And I'll start with Danny first.
I was involved in the anti-apartheid movement and the movements around change and decolonization as far back as the late 60s and early 70s. So I come out of this tradition. My family, my mother and father came of age during the civil rights movement. They were young parents who gave birth to children, and they came of age. So I've had an opportunity in my life as to work on behalf of changes that lead to an awareness, a sense of awareness, what's going on around here. What's the truth? And until we know the truth, we can't respond to that. As long as there's ways in which we remove from that truth and everything else, we can't respond to that as citizens, So the idea of citizenship was very important. All of this kind of conundrum of things that have brought me to this particular moment, and understanding that the places in the world that are most vulnerable to the changes of climate change and global warming, all those places where people do not have the resources necessary, or often their leadership doesn't have the political will that's necessary to deal with that. We were able to fortunate enough to produce a book, worked with a book by Naomi Klein called "This Changes Everything." Some years ago, my company, Louverture Films, along with my producing partner Jocelyn Barnes, and to talk about that and to focus on what are the things that people around the world themselves, collectives, women primarily, were doing to combat climate change and global warming. So those are the kind of I guess troublemakers that I've surrounded myself with, in some sense, to kind of learn more about that situation. To know that climate change is connected to levels of inequity. Climate change is connected to a number of other things, region of class and race, and ultimately it affects all of us. And the other question is, we don't have another planet we can fly off to and destroy that. We have to take what we have in this particular moment, do everything we can, knowing that it is our power as citizens, as active citizens, to change the way in which we see ourselves in relationship to the issue itself.
I am so happy you're here, Danny Glover. I don't know what to say. Colby Minifie, how would you answer that question?
Oh, well, it's hard to follow that. Yeah, I'm born and raised in New York City. I'm a city kid. I would spend summers in New Hampshire, luckily climbing around. That was like the first time I saw open flame, like fire. And so I noticed in myself, I'm one of those like just as a kid was like always going to be an actor and always performing and stuff like that. And I realized that when I was hiking, when I was in the forest, when I was in nature, that's when I felt most myself. And that's when I felt closest to myself without the clouds of, you know, all the other stuff that goes on in our brains. And when I was in high school, I went on this trip called New York to New Orleans that was run by New York City high school kids to go to New Orleans and help, you know, build houses and canvas and mow lawns after Katrina. And the big thing we learned there was this idea by Lilla Watson that says, if you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And we learned that here we have spent $300 on a plane ticket, come to New Orleans, when a lot of the same racial inequity, a lot of, not necessarily like the same hurricane has hit New York City, but a lot of the same problems that we see acting itself out in the inequalities and what happened in New Orleans already happened in New York City. So if we're gonna come to New Orleans to do this work, why not bring that same work back to New York? And I think the climate, that trip was like my first introduction to what happens when we don't take care of our planet. And other trips after that have exposed me to that as well. But it's also that same idea that Mr. Glover was just talking about, that it is all of our job. And we in this country have the luxury, and me as a, you know, New York City person who like lives in a city and has the luxury to live in that city and the money to live in that city, has the luxury to work on changing my own lifestyle and spend my time working on some of this climate fight.
Thank you, Colby. Lee, how would you answer that question?
First of all, I want to say thank you for having me on this panel. It's my first panel, so I'm really excited to just be here with all of you and be a part of this conversation. But kind of what inspired me to get involved, more so who inspired me, would be the famously well-known Greta Thunberg and just her moving, phenomenal speeches. And she was the first young activist that I saw on social media speaking up about climate change. And also her protests for Fridays for Future prompted me to go to my very first protest at the ending of 2019. It was organized by Climate Strike Youth Los Angeles. It was CA Youth versus Big Oil. And it was just such a great introduction into my activism. It was just an experience like no other. We marched all the way down to Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and we chanted and we sang. And there was just this shared want for change, and just listening to these young individuals and their shared understandable anger. And I just started to see myself in them and feel like this is where I need to be. This is a fight that I need to be involved in. And just really starting to feel the weight of the reality of our climate crisis and what position that puts us young people in. And so I left from that day feeling very inspired and angry and just wanting to be as involved as I possibly could be. And so I started to become more environmentally conscious and do my own research and make my own connections. One being our wonderful moderator, Tim Guinee, who's been such a great mentor and guider in my activism and encouraged me to take the leadership training at the Climate Reality Project. And now I'm a certified climate reality leader, and I'm just constantly being inspired and wanting to be in spaces that allow me to continue to just grow in my activism and be a part of change.
Thank you, Lee. Danny, I want to ask you a question that I get asked, and it's interesting too, after hearing you say that you felt like your acting actually came out of your activism. But young actors often ask me whether my activism has a negative effect on my career. And I wonder how you would respond to that question.
I've been fortunate enough never to talk about those things, because when I began doing, for instance, the work of Athol Fugard, the great South African playwright, I'm right in the middle of the anti-apartheid movement. So my activism played into my craft as growing as an actor. Let's just give an example. You take MST, the landless movement in Brazil. Landless movement was very effective in dealing with poor people. A great number of those are impoverished people, providing land while they were small farmers, not industrial farmers. They were preserving the Amazon. That government under the Workers' Party was doing that work. It was evident. So another government takes in. What did we do under another government? To the right takes in. What do? They begin to begin to destroy the lungs of the earth, the Amazon rainforest. There they are. That's what they did. No one does anything about it. Everything was done in some ways to undermine the work had been doing by ordinary people living their lives, doing their work, and in dealing with the climate crisis, awareness of the climate crisis, and acting in their own space as citizens to deal with that. Where do we act in our own space as citizens? How do we now uphold or lift those other movements that happen around the world, as identified in, as I said, This Changes Everything, Naomi Klein's wonderful book on climate change and global warming. Why do we now? What are the work that we do in that? How do we now find the coalitions, not only the ones that are national coalition, but international coalitions to deal with the issue around it and to make our awareness and to get governance to respond to our needs, not give us what they want to give us, but respond to our needs as citizens and people who are protective of. I always think about First Nation people who always talk about looking at what does the planet look like 150 years, another generation from now. The whole cosmology, the whole idea around what does the planet look like from its inception. The way in which they embrace their relationship to the planet in terms of preserving the planet are antithetical to, that's a word, antithetical to the way in which 19th century, 20th century industrialization has looked at the planet and everything else. And part of it is our indoctrination from that particular point in time, as if the planet is boundless and everything else. The planet is boundless. It doesn't need to be nurtured. Mother Earth is in pain right now. Mother Earth is in pain right now. And we got to do what we can do as citizens, as artists as citizens, and citizens to change that and heal her.
Danny, I hadn't thought of this. I have a memory, and I can talk to you about it later, but I'm remembering sitting with you and Ruby D when I was in my early 20s, having a breakfast, and anyhow,
Ruby D and Ozzie Davis, what can you say about Ruby D and Ozzie Davis?
Yeah, by the way, speaking to the example of extraordinary activists who, I don't think it got in the way of their career. I want to ask Colby, though. So, Colby, you're on the show The Walking Dead, and I heard this story about one of the fans of your show getting a little upset when they heard about your activism didn't seem to be the activism of the character you were playing. Is it my phrasing that right?
Yeah, well, I was playing a fascist on that show. So I was playing like a gun-wielding, army-leading colonialist on that show. And I think there were a lot of people, I don't want to say a lot, but like quite a few people who thought that they identified with me and my character on that show, and then looked at my Instagram and saw that I was very much not like that, and was, talking about environmentalism as much as I could, and like very liberal stuff. And they were, I got a couple comments of well, now I hate you, stuff like that. But ultimately, I have found that if anything, it's never hurt my career in any way to be passionate about this. If anything, it's helped. I've noticed a lot of people who hated my character on that show because she was, you know, the villain, and then seeing what I did in my personal life, they were like, oh, well, actually now I'm a fan of yours because I didn't, you know, I hated you before. But I have noticed that, you know, in this industry these days, it feels like your social media is a I don't know, like a profile of who you are, and your personality, it does get hired sometimes, you know. And I do think like there's just no time. I know, Tim, you say this, shy people starve. There's just no, I think all of this stuff matters too much to be quiet about it for my career. You know, it's like, well, what am I going to do? Like not talk about this stuff? And I do think that ultimately it serves me well for my career, which is interesting that we have to think in those terms. And I hate kind of thinking like, well, what is the actor, you know, like how does this help my acting career? But like ultimately I don't give a damn, you know what I mean? I'd rather heal a planet, because otherwise I won't have an acting career in a couple years if there's no planet left. Anyway.
Thank you. So, Lee, I want to ask you, you've started a podcast about the climate crisis. And I wonder what inspired you to do that, and why you feel that was kind of the right medium for you to use.
Yeah, well, I started learning with Lee the climate crisis mostly due to my lack of knowledge, and also just speaking with friends and family and hearing their lack of knowledge, but also their lack of interest to ask the questions of how do I act and what does that look like? And so I thought, why not use my platform to speak with different environmental activists and in the future frontliners and scientists to talk about these issues and educate me and see what I can do to be more active. And why not have people watch me do it so then they can learn along with me? And I feel and hope that this is the right approach, because I just want people to know that it's okay to not know everything, to just start from the ground up and to not be embarrassed to say, hey, I don't know much about this, but I want to know more. And so my goal within making Learning with Lee is to just be the voice for others who have the same questions as I do.
That's great. And I think that's an incredibly brave thing, that thing of saying, I don't know everything. Especially, this is a big science thing. So none of us can know everything, you know? So I want to switch around a little and think about what we can share as actors that we've learned from our work about communicating that can maybe help us talking to others about the climate crisis. So Lee, I'll just start with you this time. How do you connect with your audience on your podcast? And do you think in any way that your acting, your training, your skills are helpful in communicating about the crisis?
I would say, when speaking specifically on what you can do as an individual to be more environmentally conscious, how I kind of connect is I kind of take the route of putting myself in the hot seat and being like, this is what I did in the past. These are my mistakes and how I hold myself more accountable, and just my lifestyle, and which was not environmentally conscious whatsoever, and how I'm still not perfect at it, but I'm gaining that level of awareness and I'm working at it. And so I feel that just allows other people watching to think to themselves, okay, how do I be more environmentally conscious? What can I do to not contribute to the problem, but more so to the solution? And just a short example of that, on my next episode of Learning with Lee, I talk about fast fashion with special guest Andrea Kennedy. And I go into a bit about my personal experiences with fast fashion and why I contributed to it for so long. And some of the reasons being because it's just what I could afford at the time. And it was how I could be on trend, but at a budget. And so that's the case for a lot of people. And it's not to make anyone feel bad or guilty about it, but just to create that level of awareness and how we can improve together. And like I said, contribute to the solution and not as much to the problem. And I feel like in a way that's a way I can connect, just sharing my own personal experiences. And maybe my acting can kind of pay a bit of tribute to it, just as to how I decide to get a message across, I think.
Hey, Danny, what do you have any sense that your acting has helped you in communicating about the crisis? And I'll throw another question at you too, which maybe is broad, but maybe you have an answer to, which is, how do you deal when you're talking to folks that don't agree with you about the climate or, you know, any of the activism work you do? What's your strategy around that? There's a big question.
Well, the first question is, I remember at the 50th anniversary of a strike I was involved in at San Francisco State University in developing the first School of Ethnic Studies. And at the time, the former chairman of the BSU, the Black Student Union, said to me, I gave an explanation, an analysis of it, and the first thing he asked me, because I was pretty young then, he said, how come you didn't talk this much back in 1968? I was trying to figure out the world, and I was trying to understand that. Certainly, my access to so many different things as an actor has allowed me to see, to look not simply in the kind of myopic kind of way in which we perceive ourselves within this space, but the world. It's opened up the world to me. And opening up the world has provided so many different opportunities to talk to people about the issues within their specific community, whether those issues are here, whether they're in Mozambique, or whether they're in Brazil or Venezuela. I had an opportunity to talk to people about what their issues are. And you see what affects their real life, not what is projected often in terms of the media and everything, but what affects their real life and how they come to terms with that as they work in their own capacity in order to control it, to empower themselves. I've had the opportunity, the blessing and opportunity to be witness to how people empower themselves over all issues and then are capable of empowering themselves in response to climate change and global warming as well. And that's the wonderful thing, and the wonderful thing that acting has given to me is that it has given. It gives me a platform. I have a movie that everybody talks about. And wherever I go, it's L'Arme Fatale in France, or it's something else, it's someplace else, wherever I go. And people talk about that. And they say, well, I like what you said about this. I thought what you said about this. And I understand that. If I can do that in my own kind of way to convey that, to pique their or to support and validate their own activism within their communities, boom, we got something happening. We got a real conversation, you know. And I think that's one of the most gratifying thing about my career for me, you know. And to talk about it. I mean, who knows when I'm 20 years old. I'm 20 years old in 1967, and I read a pamphlet about a really extraordinary man who is in prison. And I begin to understand his ideas and support his ideas. Who would know that this 20-year-old student gets the chance to meet him, in support of him, and at the same time, I have a real relationship with him in Nelson Mandela. But I read about Nelson Mandela when I was 20 years old, when he was sent off to jail for life. Instead of what had happened normally would have been executed, but it was such a worldwide outcry for his trial and also the potential that he would be executed, that his life was spared. And then I get to read his ideas and work and find a way that, and then on top of it, who would have believed I would be playing him 20 years later in a film? You know what I'm saying? It's mind-blowing. And being able to understand those issues in relationship to those issues in other communities. Dr. King said it most brilliantly at his acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. And he talked about the World House, that we are a part of the World House. Then he was saying that, saying that to those people who were involved in movements there. He was saying that to those African Americans and supporters, white, brown, Asian, supported the civil rights movement, that we're part of that. He was saying that but he was pronouncing some relationship that we have to honor. We must honor. It's the only way that we can save ourselves, rescue ourselves, is to honor that we're part of a world house. Well, whether it's climate change and global warming, whether it's conflict and peace, as King said, peace is not simply the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. Whether it's climate justice, whatever it is, it's about justice.
We're all in the shoes of giants, aren't we? We all are. Just unbelievable. All right, I'm shifting gears a little. So there's a question about how can actors incorporate environmentalism into your work? Specifically, maybe when it's not an environmental story. Are there things that actors can do to lead or support sustainability on set, both in front of the camera and behind the camera? And I'll start with Colby, but then, jump in, you guys, if you have an opinion on that you'd like to share. You want to lead us off, Colby?
I always cringe when I see people on camera opening a plastic bottle or like getting water from their fridge and opening it and just pouring it into a thing. And you're just like, wait, how, what? And I do think we are constantly consuming images, especially in this time, as technology becomes more and more ubiquitous, and changing some of those images on screen, I think, is important. Like, and I feel that way in my regular life. Just piggybacking off of that last question, is that I found, to me, like some of the most effective ways of inspiring people to pay attention a little bit to the climate crisis is by leading by example. Is always bringing a reusable water bottle and always bringing little bamboo utensils and things, and biking when you can and not drive, all that kind of stuff. People then start to turn and say, oh, that looks cool. Tell me about that. Or so I do feel like on screen normalizing using reusable things and normalizing that, because I feel like right now it's at a point where it's like a character specificity thing, where it's like, oh, she uses a reusable bag, she must be a hippie. There's like, I feel like on camera there's like it says something about the character in that way. And I feel like the more on-screen reusable stuff that we can have kind of normalizes it and makes it just like part of everyday life. And I also feel like, I'm very, very lucky that at this moment I just became series regular on a show, and I finally feel like I have some influence and can inspire them to go a little bit more green, because the industry that we're in, especially film and TV, is extraordinarily wasteful. I was just talking to a transpo guy who was striking the set of another show, and he said that all of the plywood and all of the wood that they used for the set is going straight into the dumpster, and they cannot reuse it or send it to Habitat for Humanity or have anybody come and reuse it because of liability issues. And same with, sorry, I just started hailing pretty loudly. I don't know if you can hear that. But there's also, same with food, like with the catering, there's all this fear of being sued in our business. And there's so much waste as a product of that. And I think that writing, the Green Production Guide, who helped produce this panel, has been a hugely wonderful resource for me as I pitch these ideas to production to say, listen, this is how much plastic, this is how many plastic bottles we use per day. We don't have to use that. Coronavirus threw a big, pulled the rug out from under that quite significantly, because now there's all this fear of germs and all that stuff. But I do think like if we have the luxury to talk to production about how to improve their environmental impact, we should use that luxury, because I think it ultimately saves them money. It makes them look good, and it ultimately helps everybody around the world.
That's the beauty about young people, you know. So thank you, Colby. I mean, you just have me thinking, just about all the other kind of ways, just opening up a whole nother space for somebody who's got senior years, you know, about the things that we can do, little small things that we can do right there. My grandparents were born in the last part of the 19th century, and they were farmers. They were poor farmers, you know. So when I was down on the farm, everything was of some use. There's everything in which they utilize how water was precious. How my first places, I didn't go to, when I was a child, small child, in my grandparents' farm, I used the outhouse. I didn't flush the toilet. In fact, they had a toilet in there, and we were told we had to use the outhouse. That was the first thing about, some people don't know what an outhouse is, but it's all kind of thing. But it's so interesting is to listen to you, and you also, Lee, got all the kind of ways in which you inform even those people who have been around a little bit in terms of different ways, and to think about how can we find ways to lessen our wastefulness, to make our wastefulness less, and be conscious of this as well. Because part of this is if we build the kind of consciousness around these issues, then we have an opportunity, and because our consciousness bring about what I consider to be our appropriate actions to deal with what we're concerned about.
Colby, like, that's such a brave way to use your voice.
Yeah.
And that honestly inspires me to want to do the same, to, like you said, instead of using a plastic bottle, use a recycle bottle. Or like, if you see a car, let it be an electric vehicle. Or if you see a kid playing with the car, let that be an electric vehicle. And so have that written into the script more to normalize being more eco-friendly and sustainable. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up.
We all have to do what we can do as people. And I also think there's corporate responsibility. And like you were saying, Lee, I'm convinced if you took one of those Fast and Furious movies and you put an electric car in there and let it win the car chase, teenage boys across the country would want an electric car, and it would do a gigantic thing for this movement. You know, there's also, and you brought this up, Colby, this thing of, now that I have the power, I can do this and this and this on the set. You know, there are now all of these green riders that are available in contract negotiations. So if actors are in a position to, there are green riders on the EMA site, and also in UK at Albert, and in Canada at Real Green. Do you feel like you need some kind of support to speak up and be visible climate action leaders with production executives?
If I had the status of Danny Glover, I would totally put that in my contract. You know what I mean? But I at the level I'm at, I'm kind of at a point where I'm just happy to be working and to be, especially during coronavirus, to be getting a job at all. And if I do worry that if I were to have something like that in my contract, they'd be like, ooh, well, maybe we'll skip on her. Do you know what I mean? If you know, maybe down the line, I would love to have something like that in my contract. But I do think the support of, I mean, luckily there's just a lot more research going on about this kind of thing now. And I think there's a lot of information out there. I also think, you know, a lot of productions, like Sony has, and a lot of their productions, they have tried to go green, and they have found that it saves them money, and they boast about it in a great way. And they have have a lot of data on how that helped their production and how they did it and who they hired. And I think that even that and researching that kind of stuff and presenting your production company or, you know, your producers with those facts is as much support, not as much support as you need, but like it hugely helpful. And that the more that productions do it, and the more that we have our finger on the pulse of exactly what those actions do and how they help, I think that that's a huge amount of support. And I do think that productions will start to realize that it saves them money. But yeah, I also think like I'm trying right now to like get as many crew members on board across the board in terms of people who are building the sets, catering, costumes, just so that everybody can say, oh, this is something that I've noticed in my department that we do. And it would be great if we didn't do that, or it'd be great if that was changed, or we had an opportunity to change that. And I think just getting all that kind of information is really helpful. Once again, having the luxury and the power in my position currently is very helpful. But, you know, when I was running around as a guest star and coming in day here, day there, that's not, you know, the best thing you can do is like, here's my cup. You know what I mean? I don't know if that made any sense, but
it did. Danny, there was an audience question for you, which is, can you talk a little bit more about the intersection between the climate crisis and environmental racism, environmental injustice, et cetera?
Well, that's certainly it's a conversation we can have in and of itself. Because we often don't, we all think that all of us are affected similarly by what is happening in climate change and global warming. And that's not true. That's not true in the world. It's not even true in our own country. That those who are most vulnerable are those people who are poor and those people of color are most vulnerable. They're the ones that are always the ones who are the in some sense, the canary in the mine shaft. They're the ones that are first affected by that. And I think we have to be concerned about that. But it has always been, we have a system, it's based upon consumption and waste. Plastic is not something we've been living with for generation. Plastic is a new phenomenon. The fact that we're dealing with the issue, and we're talking about climate change, global warming, we're talking about dealing with the sea, the water, life that comes from the sea and water, and the impact on that. We have to understand the interrelationship between the system we live in and it's receptive to waste. Waste in that sense. As much as we talk about that, as much as we talk about recycling, but it is this wasteful system in which only a small portion of the world is involved in, but the majority of the world is impacted by that. So it's only a small portion of the world that is involved in it. You know, if you take the poorest country and say how much do they contribute to global warming and climate change, it would be minuscule to the largest countries in the world, those largest countries, industrialized countries in the world, and the impact that they have on it. Yet they're the ones who are most endangered by it, the most who are affected first, the ones who everything. That's real. But that has been about everything from the whole idea of development, the whole idea of conflict and peace, and all those things that we talk about and that we fought for years. So it's no accident that they are the ones who are right there at the most vulnerable part of climate change and global warming. You know, and those are the things we have to talk about. We don't talk about that, then we're missing the boat. You know, there are 8 billion people on the planet. The people who use the most resources on the planet and who are siphon off the most air, the most water, the most, and then let's talk about industrial waste of water, the industrial waste of water and the impact that that has on the climate. All this, we having a drought right here. And we're talking about the drought. What is the relationship to the drought to global warming and climate change? Those are things we have to talk about. It has to be out, but you have to build movements around it. You have to say, this is where we stand, this is what we need, and this is what we want, and we're going to struggle and fight to get it done. That's what movements are about.
Thank you, Danny. Lee, and I'm going to exclude Colby from this description, but there are at least two old farts on this panel. And I wonder, as a sort of youth representative, what you would want to say to older folks.
I would want to say to just continue to support and uplift the youth and our voices, because sometimes as young people, we're not taken as seriously, or we're told that we don't know what we're talking about, what we do, because it's the longevity of our futures at stake. And it's just a really weird reality to live in, to question how long of a life you'll have because of their circumstances. So I would say just make space for us and defend us, because we have a lot to say, especially about our futures.
As Paul Robeson said, that each generation makes its own history and is judged by the history that is made. This is their history, this generation's history. This may be the generation that shifts the discourse and the narrative in terms of climate change and global warming.
Colby, I want to ask you a question. What climate change solutions are you most excited about?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm really excited about electric cars. I just think they're so cool. I also am deeply worried about lithium and the process of mining lithium for those batteries, for those cars. I'm curious and interested in doing more research on that, but currently, oh God, I would love to drive an electric car. I drive a disgusting car right now, and I feel terrible about it. So, you know, that's what I'm excited about. Also, wind and solar, like, so cool. And I love that we have more and more control over that. I just put solar panels on I live in a 14-foot trailer right now, and I just put solar panels on this thing, and it's so exciting when the sun comes out, and I know that that's juicing my electricity. I think it's really exciting. And that when I go and back to Brooklyn, and I live in Brooklyn, I can go to Con Ed and I can say, I want to use this company called Green Mountain Energy, and I want all of my energy that is administered by Con Ed to come from wind and solar. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's like how we're going to get out of the economic recession that we're in, and how we're going to solve a lot of the problems that we're in. So I'm excited about those things.
Danny, there's a question. What's your call to action for the audience, whether they're fans or whether they're industry folks or just regular folks? What would you ask them to step forward and do?
Wow.
I'm giving you a little tiny question, Danny.
I think that where there's building a consensus in the institutions that affect their lives, in the church, religious, if religion is one of them, in other ways in which you elevate the conversation. And that's what the audience has to do, is elevate the conversation. And in elevating the conversation, you become on the front line of the discussion and the front line of the actions that need to be taken. We need that audience to elevate the conversation in every way in which they can. And there's so many outlets. Whether we elevate it on social, look at the most beautiful thing about social media. You know, I know because my daughter is the queen of social media. You know, she find out stuff about me that I had forgotten about. But in that sense, use the moment and using our voice, use it in the places that we have some effect in the workplace, in the places where we worship, in the places where we organize as a community. And that's about building community as well. So we're building the community at the same time, and we're validating the community and its power to make demands. We have to keep that. However we do it, they can't shut us up. You know, they can't turn a 12-year-old girl around and tell her to go home. She goes anywhere around the world. And we're following. Where is she going next? You know, here she is. She's a living epitome of the present and the need for the struggle for the present, for her future, and the future that goes beyond that.
Wow.
She's walking it. She's living it. I mean, she's walking it. You can't tell her she can't do it. You can't tell her it's unacceptable. You can't tell her that because she knows that the only way that it's going to get done for her future is that she becomes a participant and a participant in all of our rescue. Not only her rescue, but our rescue, who are theirs and those to become as well. That's what she is. She's an architect and participant in our rescue.
Thank you. So we're down to the very last question. And this is a fast one. You get 30 seconds each. Gina McCarthy says she always talks about being a climate optimist. And the question is, and we'll start with Colby and then go Lee and Danny. What gives you hope?
Yeah, the youth, Greta, the youth, and the discussions that the discussions that they are raking up. Not only Greta, but activists around the world who are the people, who are representing the people who will be most affected first, and who are inspiring all of us to show up.
Lee?
All of you and all of your work, and knowing that there are solutions in the making, and just staying active and staying a part of the conversation is what brings me the most hope.
How about you, Danny?
Since we are 5% of the population and use a third of the resources in the world, it is our mandate and it's our responsibility as citizens of this country to yell out at the highest level to talk about that climate change in relationship to not just us, but the future of our children and children's children as well. You matter. Your voice matters. And now is the time that your voice is heard. That's what we've been saying. That's what Lee and Colby have been saying. And you as well as Tim, that your voice matters.
Yeah, there's nobody, no one's replaceable in the struggle. Everybody has a particular point of entry and power, and we need everybody. And the thing that, I'm so inspired just listening to you guys. And part of why is it's possible to feel all alone in this struggle. But if you open your mouth and your ears, you'll discover community all around you, because the facts keep showing more and more and more that people are leaping into this conversation. And we need to hold up people. And as Danny said, we need to hold up the people nobody's listening to, because that's where a lot of the wisdom is. But it's all of us together that, Dr. King said we have to recognize that the fact that tomorrow is today. We don't have time. And we don't have time for shyness. And together we're moving this thing forward. And I am buoyed by listening to all of your wisdom, and what a joy, and buoyed by the audience joining us today. And thank you for sharing your time and energy with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really inspiring.